Hey guys, Meredith here with Madam Diesel. Today we're going to talk about how this cylinder head took out an entire engine. What happened, why, and why we're having to repower the boat as a result. Now those of you guys who've been following me have seen a couple cylinder heads in and out of the shop. This particular one tells quite a story. And so today I'm going to have you guys put on your thinking caps because we're going to get into some more advanced diagnostics and how I came up to the conclusions I came to about this thing and why, in order to move forward, we can't continue to use it. Let's go back in time a little bit. And one of the most important things in diagnosing an engine is kind of getting the background story of what was happening. And the background story of this was the engine was severely overheated because the seacock was left closed. Now, we've all done it, including me. There's people who do it and people who lie about it. And but this one was not caught in time. The engine was majorly overheated. And so things needed to be pulled apart anyways to, make sure like a head gasket wasn't blown, that there weren't cracks, anything like that. Now, this particular head I know is cracked. However, I have not magnafluxed it yet. And I do want to do that today with you guys. I want to show you how I magnaflux parts in the shop. However, there's enough hints about this thing that told me what was going on even without having to magnaflux anything. So that's one of the most important things that helps me come to a conclusion that I come to, is getting all the history, watching the engine run if I can, and then as I tear it apart, picking up on different, signs of what's actually happened. I've taken a straight edge to this, and as I pulled it apart, I picked up on some things that kind of gave me an answer right away, unfortunately. And really all I'm doing today is confirming my thoughts. This particular head, while it's still flat, there was evidence that showed at least a head gasket was blown. And the next thing to check would be whether this is cracked, whether the block was cracked or not. What told me that it was cracked is some stuff I found around the injectors, and I'll show you guys that in a sec. Now, it's kind of hard to see now. These injectors have been sitting in a bag for about a week, but when I first pulled them out of the engine, the entire injector body was soaking wet with like an oily, watery substance. All four of them were, so that makes me suspect a crack around the injectors. Now, I know the injectors are kind of hard to see, but there's other hints that kind of give away just how wet those bores are. I don't know if you can see up that injector bore right in there, but every bore is soaking wet, and you can actually see it kind of leaking out. There's no way for those bores to be soaking wet. In fact, the top of the engine was bone dry, so we are getting liquid from somewhere inside the head where we shouldn't have. Another thing to consider, why is this valve soaking wet? Nothing else is soaking wet, and nothing else should be. Even the oil inside the cylinder wouldn't cause it to be wet like this. Now, granted, this could be something like a valve stem seal that's leaking oil down from up above. However, you just don't know until you take things apart and look. So there's evidence of moisture. Obviously, this head's been sitting on a shelf here at the shop for a couple days. I pulled it off, but immediately what I noticed was just how wet those injectors and injector bores were. Now, inside the bore, let me get this thing rotated to where you can see it, but inside the bore, like, you can't really see in there, but short of the valve cover being on, these bores should be bone dry. On this particular engine, the injectors are not cooled with diesel, coolant, or oil. This is not like a caterpillar head where certain injectors, they have like what's called injector cups that are inserted into the head, and then there's coolant or something that flows around them to help keep them cool. In this case, this head does not have any of that. These are simply machined bores, and these injectors fit down into them and then use a copper crush washer, like you can see at the end. It's pretty black, but it uses that copper crush washer as the sealing surface between the compression of the cylinder and the outside world. See if we can't get a closer look. This is kind of hard to show you guys just how wet these bores actually were. Let's see. You can kind of see in there, and you can actually see that it's like water. It's not oil. It's water. And you can just see how like sopping wet they were. When I pulled those injectors out, they were beyond drenched. They were covered. And now that this thing is sat for a few days, you can actually see some salty residue. Now, another thing to note that this engine had a problem with was the heat exchanger had never been tested. And so I know, based on seeing some of the cooling passages, that there was salt water mixing with our coolant. So the fact that I'm seeing salty residue inside injector bores that should be bone dry tells me coolant might be getting in there. And it looked like a mix of coolant and oil on the injectors. It was like a milky substance, kind of a darker brown substance, but it was more watery. You guys probably know what regular engine oil feels like. What was on those injectors was not regular engine oil. So that's what led me to the conclusion, somewhere in the middle of this head, there may be a crack. Another hint to consider is just how wet with water, not just oily residue. I expect to see oily residue, but I did not expect to see that much water on the intake side. So I imagine the crack is somewhere on the intake injector side versus the exhaust side. Let's take a look at the exhaust, see what that looks like. But these aren't that oily, especially this valve right here, this guy right here. It doesn't look, injector or valve stem seals may have been leaking some. It is oily in there, but it's not like a blown seal. You would know. It would be solid oil. You'd see it pouring out of the exhaust. We didn't see any of that, even with the engine running. So I know they were a little bit leaky, but I shouldn't have any water over here on the intake side. The intake was sopping wet as well. All right, let's take a closer look at this exhaust side. Let's see if I can get you in there. It's so hard with a bright light. I can see that, valve stems were leaking, had a minor leak, but nothing significant. This side is pretty much bone dry. It's sooty. There's a slight amount of oil inside on those exhaust stems, but not much. So I don't think valve stem seals were too bad on this particular cylinder head. So despite suspecting cracks where I can't see them, I do actually want to test the deck of the cylinder head. I'm going to clean it up the best I can just with brake clean, go over it once more with a razor blade. I am noting something that kind of looks like a crack, but again, to the naked eye, it's kind of hard to see. What's fascinating is some of the signs that I've been able to discover even several days later. So this is kind of where it's worth, checking again before you come to your final conclusion and making, a decision. We really want to double check that this thing is actually a problem. I'm doing a straight edge job here yet again, and sure enough, this thing is warped in the middle relatively significantly. In fact, so much so that I'm taking my flashlight and confirming, yeah, there's actually quite a gap right towards cylinder 2 and 3. And yes, this probably could be machined out. Looks like it's a fairly minor warpage. However, that adds another thing to the list of expenses if we wanted to save this head. This particular kit is a dye penetrant kit made by the company called Magnaflux. We're going to start by using their cleaner. I've scraped the head. It's nice and smooth. We're going to spray this down really well, wipe it off, and try to get any contaminants off this deck so it doesn't react with the penetrant. Next is the actual penetrant itself. This is like a blood red dye. And we're going to coat the surface of the head, and then we've got to let it sit from anywhere from like 10 to 30 minutes. Sometimes you can clean it off and reapply it, especially if it starts kind of bubbling. I'm just seeing if there's anything obvious starting to show up yet. Not quite. We're not through the process though. So we're going to clean it off. It's been about 10 minutes. I'm going to clean it off once. Just make sure I actually see some bubbles forming, and they want you to clean it up and reapply it if you see that. So we're going to reapply it yet again, and then I'm going to walk away for about 30 more minutes. All right, it has been 30 minutes, and we're going to clean this off one final time. And they do not want you spraying the bottom of the head directly with the cleaner. They want you wiping it off just with a rag, and then they'll have you kind of soak the rag in their cleaner and lightly clean it off. They don't want you flooding, any crevices with cleaner, because if the penetrant has found a crack and you just blast it, it's not going to show up. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm just cleaning this deck off, and then we're going to put the developer on. This is the developer, and this stuff is really fascinating. We're going to shake it up for a bit and then evenly apply it across the whole surface and let it dry. The instructions want you to be really even with this and not put too much on, because if you put too much on, you can actually screw up the test. So take your time with this. Now for the fun part, letting it sit for another 10 to 30 minutes and watching it develop. Any obvious cracks are going to show up right away. And the small, hairline cracks are going to take much longer to see. So be patient at this step. All right, it's been about 10 minutes or so. And I'm going to take a good close look at this thing and see if anything jumps out at me. So far, not too much. Looks pretty clean. It's pretty cool how this developer works. The cracks do actually make themselves relatively obvious. I think we found it right there. That's a hard one to see. That's a very small hairline crack, but it is between our coolant port and one of our valves. So did you guys see it? It's pretty dramatic now that you can see it, but this is after letting the developer sit for about 10 minutes. It's a minor crack, but it goes right in between one of our cooling passages in, and looks like it cracked the whole valve seat and everything. So yeah, this head unfortunately is done. And this particular engine doesn't have, you can't buy a new head for it, unfortunately. So, we talked about it. When I cleaned it off, we did find the warpage. You guys saw the warpage. There's quite a low spot right in the middle. But as I was scraping this, you can kind of see some evidence. However, believe it or not, the crack doesn't actually follow most of the gunk here. It's actually right to the right of it. And you can't see it with the naked eye. In fact, I do expect more cracking within the head where we can't really test it. I wasn't exactly expecting a crack on the actual deck of the head. So I'm glad we Magnafluxed it. There were, however, enough hints elsewhere that tells me there's more cracks than just the one we're seeing. But when this didn't clean off, in fact, I can see it now. I suspected it, but I really couldn't see it without Magnafluxing it. So that's where these Magnaflux kits come in really, really handy. They will pay off. They're very expensive, so unless you're doing this on a regular basis, financially it's not really worth it. But for somebody who's working their own business, running their own shop, this is where it pays off. Now I can confidently tell my customer, yes, this head is actually cracked. It's warped. We could have machined that out potentially, but it's actually cracked. So now it's not even worth wasting the customer's money to have it machined. So what does this tell us? Did you guys learn anything from this process? This is why it's worth spending the money to have things checked. I've actually come across several cylinder heads and even blocks that were cracked where, you know, we had them pulled apart for a different reason. And one of the shops where I used to work, we used to test everything that came apart regardless of the cause. You know, whether it was overheating or some other reason, we still checked it. And sure enough, I have been surprised by things I found. Now, this one I kind of suspected some major damage based on the history I got from the customer and the things that I found. And, you know, so I was expecting that there was a crack somewhere because there's no other explanation for the amount of liquid I found in the injector bores. But, you know, I still, you know, wanted to test and make sure, hey, I don't want to like throw this head away if, you know, if there's no reason to actually throw it away. If we could actually reuse it. Now, typically, an overheated engine, the first thing that's going to fail is your head gasket. And the head gasket is kind of built similar to bearings where it's meant to be sacrificial. It's going to fail first. And when we pulled the head gasket apart on this thing, you could actually see the failure mark. When I pulled the valve cover off this, there were early signs of water mixing with the oil. Not much. It wasn't milky yet, and it wasn't like billowing smoke or anything like that. However, there was enough to give me some sort of indication that something wasn't quite right. And I'm glad we looked deeper because the original intent was never to pull the head off. That was actually not part of the original plan. And I'm glad that we did because he would have had constant problems had we, you know, just left the engine alone and replaced the impeller. So if you're suspecting something, you need to investigate. And the more you understand how each of these individual systems work, the more you're going to be able to think through what the problem could be. So in this case, knowing that the injectors should be bone dry told me something, you know, must be cracked. Something must be getting in around those injectors. And it's not oil. It's not soot. It's not like leaking compression because that usually leaves like a black gooey substance. It was watery. And it did have oil mixed in with it, but it was mostly watery, which was very odd. There was no water that was dripping on the engine. The top of the engine was bone dry. And so to see that is what triggered me to want to dig further and to start to become concerned, like, okay, maybe it's more than just a head gasket, because if you think about kind of the internal plumbing of a cylinder head, a head gasket would not cause moisture to get up around those injectors. So you've got to think about how the part is made up, where all the fluids may be. You know, this head does have coolant flowing through it. So when the coolant is in places you don't want coolant to be, how does it get there? Is it like an external leak? Is it like a head gasket leak? Is it a crack? What is it? And, you know, there's different tools and methods to find that. And today I showed you just one of them, but I already kind of had the conclusion in my head. This is more of the confirmation, so I can positively say, yes, this head is actually bad and we need to make decisions, on what to do next based on the evidence we have in front of us. Well, that's what I got for you guys today. Thanks so much for watching me test this. Now my table looks like a bloody, gory mess. We got to get cleaned up for the night. I will plan on seeing you guys in the next one. Let me know if there's anything specific you want to see. I've got a couple good videos set up for you in the future. And thanks for watching.